On this episode of Opolis Public Radio, we'll dig into identity, user-friendly authentication, how to bring Web3 to your next-door neighbor, and the shared revenue model that we have employed at the Employment Commons. Welcome to episode 5 of Opolis Public Radio. Today I'm joined by Sean Lee, my friend. Sean has served as the co-founder and CEO of Magic Labs, formerly Fortmatic, since 2018. He previously worked at Docker, Kitematic, and served as a fellow at Lightspeed Venture Partners, and is a University of Waterloo graduate in computer software engineering. Welcome, Sean. How are you, man?
Yeah, good. Thanks so much, John. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. So let's kick off into why you're here. So, Fortmatic, now Magic Labs. We've been obviously following you guys closely since your real launch at East Denver 2019. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the advent of Fortmatic, now Magic Labs, how you got into the space, why you're here. I think Waterloo probably had a little bit of something to it. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that whole story?
Yeah, it was, my life, I can't escape dev tools. I always get roped back into it since I graduated. And it's something that I kind of enjoy doing, even in school. It's like I wrote tools to make assignments easier to do. So it's kind of like baked into my personality. And then, started with making Docker a super complicated concept for many developers, really, really simple. In late 2016, that's when I got into Ethereum. And I realized that it's also complicated, and then my itch started to happen again. And then I wanted to, build some dApps. And so for me, if you can see the design, I'm like super anal about design and onboarding. So we did user testing, and just people couldn't even get started. Like less than 10% people can get through the experience of having to use like Chrome extensions or seed phrases in order to use an application. And I've never seen anything like blockchain, right? Like it's such an interesting thing that combines three things, right? Identity, infrastructure, and finance. There has never been something, one piece of technology like that does all of it. So that got me like really, really excited. On top of the implications on politics and finance and money, right? So
sure, of course,
it's really exciting. And but when I'm a developer trying to build an application, no one could use it. So I'm like, there's a huge disconnect between the two. And I felt like I really have to do something about that. And because it's also something that I really enjoy doing. So I actually waited for a while for innovations to happen in the space so I could build my dApp. But I waited for 3 months and nothing really happened. And there was this whole bunch of excitement around the space. So I was like, yeah, screw it. I'm just gonna do it myself. So that's what Fortmatic was. It's really an SDK that helps developers onboard to dApps without having to kind of go through all the hassle trying to get things set up, and use a familiar like Web 2.0 style authentication experience. So that's how it pushed me to start. But obviously it took a while to build, and we thanks to John East Denver 2019, we were able to. It's the first time we just launched it, and kind of hope for the best there.
Yeah, I think we did pretty good. I mean,
yeah.
And then we had you back with in 2020 using Fortmatic for authentication for everybody.
Yeah, that was such a great experience, and East Denver was super awesome for kind of helping us acquiring customers as well. So right after
user
the first
feedback,
conference,
just the whole development process for the applications and stuff. And
Right, right. And just like hearing all these things and all the things that's going on, it's like a pretty accurate pulse of what's happening in the space.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, we were happy to help, and what was really fun about it is we actually got early kind of exposure to your white label SDK. And that was, Opolis was the first.
For sure. And then, and that's like where we grew the conviction of, such thing would work with Magic as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something correct. So let me make sure that I understand this. So being in the Web3 space, you kind of notice this usability problem, this onboarding problem, this, even for developers, giving people access to their dApps problem, where like the only thing on the market back in 2018 really was MetaMask. I mean, that's what we were using. And, now actually, who was I talking to the other day? Somebody said, like, if you have a dApp that basically demos using MetaMask as a requirement for, getting your user in, like you're pretty much dead man walking, right? Like,
oh, wow.
I mean, not that crypto nerds can't use it. Like MetaMask is great, but like when you talk about scaling a product into, wide scale adoption, like, it's not. It makes it very, very difficult.
For sure. And there's a couple of problems that as we build out Fortmatic, and something we also observed is like the value that can be accrued by dApps are thinning because of solutions like that, right? Like this, if you really think about one wallet to serve everything, it almost feels like a centralizing force, and different customers will have different requirements, right? Like, and you can't fit all of them in the same solution, because it's going to bloat, and then it's going to be really, really complicated for people. So it's almost like a design by committee kind of thing. But that's also really, really dangerous, for example, for decentralized applications, because say, if a wallet that they heavily depend on started adding features that they start implementing, then that's like really that might be a loss of revenue or incentives for users to use the dApp. So that's one thing that we kind of observed, and that's like the main driver for this white labeledness, right? With Magic Labs, with the white label SDK, with Fortmatic. So this way, we can stay really, really lean and just do what we do, and let dApps kind of build out the experiences that they want, and while providing them all the tools that they need.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, we just launched the Opolis product into the wild a couple of weeks ago. And what's great is people are using Magic and they don't even know it.
Right.
Like, we don't have to tell them, oh, look at us, we're Web3, we're blockchain. Like, most of the people we're talking to don't even know anything about that.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So let's kind of rewind a minute and talk a little bit about the notion of like two terms. There's the overlap between us is really the notion of self-sovereign identity, and then for us, it's really that self-sovereign worker, right? So the self-sovereign worker is kind of a legal and social kind of movement, but then the notion of self-sovereign identity. So, talk to us a little bit about the authentication process, and like how we're evolving, and what this is going to look like, and all that. So just to refresh here real quick, here's how we define self-sovereign identity from the Opolis white paper. It's the concept of individuals or organizations having sole ownership of their digital and analog identities, and control over how their personal data is shared and used. This adds a layer of security and flexibility, allowing the identity holder to only reveal the necessary data for any given transaction or interaction. Since identity is such a central part of society, it is necessary to ensure that the user control will be the primary foundation SSI will be built on. Okay? And then self-sovereign worker, to kind of dovetail that, is defined as based on the concept of SSI. The SSW will not only have sole ownership of their digital and analog identities and control over how their personal data is shared and used. The individual also have ownership over their employment and how their employment data is shared and used. So, which obviously includes a legal construct in addition to just the technological components. So, why is this so important? I mean, we've talked about a lot of people get caught up in the tech, right? It's all Web3 and Bitcoin and all this, but cast your vision for this. Why is this component of this movement so important? What's your...
I think if we look at, let's look at self-sovereign identity first. What identity really is, it's actually less about the authentication, right? That's kind of, to me, that's like an implementation detail, but it's more about the data that is associated with the users, right? And
sure.
And so in this case, let's say, who are the biggest identity providers? It may actually be Workday, who has a lot of data about users.
They're doing a blockchain project, right? Did you hear about that? They're doing an identity project. I'll have to send it to you, but they're actually working on an identity project at Workday.
Interesting.
I don't have a lot of hope for it, but that's a whole different podcast.
Right. It's this thing that most people are not seeing, that these it actually always starts from this HR and this employment related providers. It's because they have the most comprehensive set of data for each individual, right? And that's actually what the user identity is. But then, we all adopt this ethos of decentralization, right? The obvious danger is that Workday, one company, is going to own the identity.
They're going to own they're going to own the protocol for identity.
Right.
It's the technocratic problem, right? It's not really that different, in my opinion, from what Libra represents to Bitcoin. Right. It's okay, you're just taking, the central banking out of the government's hands and you're putting it in a corporation's hands.
Right. Exactly. And these data are extremely valuable.
Yeah. Same kind of thing. Workday has the same incentives they've always had, which is they're a public company and they look to drive shareholder value, not stakeholder value, but shareholder value, which is about IP and data.
Yep.
And revenue streams, of course. But they're... I always find it interesting how these sort of stalwart companies are trying to get involved in this space, and I don't really know that they understand that what is being built is actually designed to replace them.
Right. It's very I think it's about the initial intent, right? Really matters in terms of this. To me, you can't start with the intent to own everything and then kind of give it away. It's going to be way more difficult than kind of starting a new wave of protocols and systems that where the intention is that it's self-sovereign workers, self-sovereign identity, right? So making the switch actually cannibalizes their own kind of ecosystem by doing that. So chances are it's not going to be done the right way, because it's just a very conflicting kind of narrative, and also we see this discussed a lot when we jump on calls. Is companies looking for portable identity, right, between different companies, and Magic could technically be this connective tissue, right, for these identity providers and other type of services, and while providing kind of the baseline security and authentication.
Well, what I think is really important to note there is it seems like, I've heard even at the state of Colorado level, they talk about federated data, right? So they're talking about sharing data across platforms inside the state ecosystem. But the thing they seem to miss is that the data really belongs to the user, right? It's not them sharing their data. It's them sharing data about an individual amongst themselves. So it's kind of like taking the concept of federated sharing, but really making sure the ownership lays in the hands of the individual, right? So the individual can choose to port between and make it more flexible, but it's really user-centric, not really designed for corporations, right?
Right.
I mean,
for sure. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So user-friendly authentication. Okay, let's just kind of get down to the brass tacks of what you guys are kind of doing right now and why this matters so much. Explain to our listeners like what exactly it is that user-friendly authentication is and how it works for you, how you guys make it happen, and then sort of like the trade-offs, like the kind of progressive decentralization, like how you're actually making this happen and how you're going to market.
Right. Well, first of all, like user-friendly authentication, it's what it describes, like where users can use it without a lot of friction, right? Not 40 steps, right, getting started, but like maybe 2 at the most.
Click on all the traffic lights and and like I'm not the captchas and I'm not a robots and all that stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah. If people, that happens when a platform gets more attention. So it's to prevent like kind of spams. But for us, we really gravitate towards passwordless authentication.
Right. So explain what that is. Explain what that is.
Yeah. So it's with things such as magic links. We send you an email. The email has a link, which is what they call magic links. And the user will click on the link and they're automatically logged into the application that they were using without ever needing something like a password or trying to remember a password. And it's it's pioneered by companies like Slack or Medium, which has a reputation of having good user onboarding experience. So that's where kind of, I think the term for magic links kind of came from. We feel like there's been, like passwords are actually terrible, right? It actually causes more problems because it's a chain reaction. If one company gets compromised with all the user passwords, it makes hacking other companies much easier. So it's kind of like a virus that spreads. And most security or identity companies these days, they actually hope that password exists so that they can make money providing password security. It's kind of like maybe lobbying.
It's like antivirus software, right? It's like, well, we wouldn't have anything to sell if there weren't viruses.
Right. So that's like a really interesting and thing, right? It's kind of like taxes. It's complicated, so TurboTax can sell more service. So
that's another podcast too.
Yeah, there's a lot of future podcasts here, but I feel like we have the opportunity really to start from scratch and kind of start from passwordless authentication, right? Which is becoming like a trend just recently too, because 93% of all the data compromised happened within the last 8 years in a 16-year period. So it's speeding up and things are not looking very good. So removing passwords, it's kind of like wearing masks for a company. It's actually socially responsible if you don't get hacked. And then it's going to prevent other people from getting hacked. So that's one thing that we really want to push with Magic is this passwordless authentication. Under the hood, it's powered by decentralized identity, like pioneered by, the W3C standard. Microsoft and other identity providers are heavily looking into it. And then this decentralized identity is actually based on top of blockchain key pairs, right? Which is what I feel like it's like a loaded key pair. Instead of a proprietary public-private key pair, we use blockchain key pairs, and that's like loaded with meaning and help us connect to the blockchain infrastructure like much easier, right? In the future, to DeFi, to DEOs, and just anything you can imagine, right? Instead of companies that kind of use their proprietary techniques, if blockchain becomes thing, they're not future-proof to be able to just instantly connect with this massive ecosystem. So, that's something that we're quite excited about. The trade-off here really is kind of familiarity. Some users may not be used to having a fully passwordless experience.
They want, or they're conditioned to want that, right? They're like,
right.
What's my password? I don't know. They correlate that to, that's just what you do.
Right. It's like, is it safe without a password?
Right. Exactly. So how are you overcoming that? Like, I mean, is it just a slow slog of education, or is there another path to this? Because I think you mentioned Medium and Slack have kind of done some of this. So like, I've even had authentication systems where they'll text you like a passcode and then you put it in, right? Like you do that too,
right.
Where it's like you're using other points of security, like mobile devices or 2FA or things like that to like verify a person's identity. Do you think it's just going to catch on, or what do you think? What do you think the magic bullet is?
Yeah, I mean the
magic bullet, right?
Nice. It's all, it is a problem that kind of solves by itself, and I feel like maybe when Slack and Medium first did it, it could be like an odd thing for many people. But as there's more application adding passwordless experience, users do get more used to it. Like I think Substack just has magic links now too. So I think it for things like this, it's all about timing. If you're like too early, it may be like difficult. But just given all these hacks recently and this general more awareness about passwords, like why do I need a password manager, right? Like why are there all these password breaches? Like it kind of like slips into the user's consciousness, right? And they're starting to be more aware of these things now. And then at this right timing, you combine it with like more pieces around security, and we talk about identity, and there's more about why we shouldn't have passwords. It's going to eventually move the needle. And then we think magic as this catalyst, right? That we are able to convince developers that, hey, magic passwordless is a good thing to do. And then there's going to be more applications using passwordless, and the message kind of spreads by itself. So, that's our idea here.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, it seems like these things have their own sort of network effects. They have their own virility, and when you get to a point where companies like LastPass are making a killing on just helping people manage their garbage, like passwords and like not get locked out of their systems. Like I know I'm guilty of this totally.
Right.
And then like, so I don't forget stuff, I use the same password over multiple platforms, which is why it makes it so easy to hack other companies, because you can basically reuse the data, because so many people use the same password authentication over multiple platforms to make it easy to remember. Right.
51% of people reuse their passwords.
Oh, I bet it's more than that. Like, I mean, that's just, that's like it's like 51% reuse their passwords, 49% are lying about it. Like, it's it is what it is. So okay, so let's jump into the future a bit then. So you and I have talked a lot about like the future of identity, the future of authentication, the future of work. And really all of this kind of circles around this one core problem that we all have around building our products in this space, which is user adoption. And, 2019 was the year of DeFi, right? And 2020 is sort of a mulligan year, I think, in a lot of respects for a lot of things. There's just lots of pause buttons, and not that we're not moving forward. It's just a different kind of inertia. It's kind of an interesting energy, I think, this year.
Right.
But 2021, there's a lot of eyes on that, right? Like what's going to happen coming out the backside of COVID-19? What are the major developments going to be? Because DeFi is great, but really it's mostly just a bunch of crypto nerds and speculators that are like, doing their thing, right? And you talk about average next door neighbors, right? Like how do you, what's the future of getting our next door neighbors using these more democratic systems, right? Because that's really what this is about. This isn't about the tech just for the tech's sake. The tech actually is a path to a social outcome, which is more fair, democratic outcomes, more choice and liberty around how my identity is being used, how my data is being used, ownership of it's the sovereignty movement, right? Which is really liberty. It's really just about giving people choice, commercial choice, like really, not just being sort of a part of a people farm and data extraction or value extraction. So what why Opolis? Why Fortmatic? Why Magic Labs? Like why is this important, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's many facets to this, and I think with Fortmatic, Magic Labs, we thought about a lot about onboarding, right? And it's not as simple like onboarding into the blockchain or decentralized or more democratic systems. It's not that straightforward, like cutting down frictions in the onboarding experience, right? That's what we do best. So that's the piece that we contribute to, right? Whereas there's a lot of other things. How do you even get people in crypto space to interact with DeFi at all? Right? Like
most people have no idea what the heck it is.
Yeah,
they're like
off ramps. Yeah.
Yeah, and then how do you make it usable with off ramps? Yeah.
Right. So it's like a lot of that, and that's one thing that really made me gravitate towards Opolis. And what you are working on is, I realized that like one of the best ways to onboard someone to a system is to pay them with the currency that's or mechanism that's part of the system, right? Kind of like why we spend fiat money to buy stuff, because we're paid in fiat. and it's the best way to onboard people, right? So I think if we're able to solve this kind of giving people money problem in a legal way, in a compliant way, in a way that's like super, super easy, it's going to be really, really beneficial to the kind of mainstream user and giving them more ideas around what they can do with the money and this system. So I think that's like the ultimate starting point. It's like from ground, like zero, right? Whereas like solving user friction is like level 1, right? So we need to kind of start with the bottom to get started with that. So and it's also very good timing, because now with COVID, people are getting more familiar with like remote work, which enhances this kind of digital nomad movement that started a couple of years ago too. So I moved out of city. I think like a lot more people are gonna like work while they travel, and there's just like a lot of
100% agree. I mean, the trends are all pointing that direction, and this was before COVID, right? COVID is just an accelerant. It's like putting gas on the fire. But I read an article the other day that there was some prominent company. Gosh, who was it? I think it was in San Francisco or maybe LA that said, we've basically realized that we can go remote. Like they'd never tried it before, right? So like, nobody had ever like whoever it was, but it was a prominent company. I mean, it wasn't like, was it? I got a comment here that it was Twitter. Well, Twitter was one of them at least. So Twitter said that, I guess. And I mean, it's a thing. And I think it's not just about that though. I mean, what it seems to me, so we've talked at length about this, both you and I, and we talk about this a lot, but it seems like just the values of and what people expect to get out of their work and commercial experiences is just very different than what the value proposition was even 20 years ago.
Right.
People are looking for variety, flexibility, freedom, choice, where 20 years ago, it was really, employment was designed as a means to an end. And you were sort of plugging into this system that, like it or hate it, you needed to participate in because you had to figure out how to fund your lifestyle, whatever you wanted, right?
Right.
Now you got to choose whatever your lifestyle was, but you had to kind of, depending on how high up the echelon you wanted to go, the more and more you had to sell your soul to get to it. and I think those realities maybe there's a little bit of a cynicism coming from younger populations, watching the older populations be miserable and stay in jobs they hate. And I think there's just a movement away from this sort of, as we refer to it, this paternalistic employment, right? So I think these concepts like dovetail very closely with the whole movement of what really Web3 is about, socially speaking.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
And I agree with you. I mean, our entire supposition was all about, like, how do we get a bunch of people exposed to these concepts? And whether or not they elect to get paid in crypto, they have the option to doing it. And kind of like you said about, getting the passwordless stuff being adopted. I personally think it's just a function of time. As long as people have access and they can see it and they have choice, at some point they're going to go, maybe I should participate in this, decentralized retirement plan.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe I should invest in Bitcoin or some other coin, right? Or like some other digital asset, right? Maybe I should, try these things out. And I think over time, I think it's just a hill of dominoes. I think people just start doing it, and then the systems and functions that create capability to accept other currencies for payments and all of that become more widespread. And before you know it, you can pretty much pay in whatever you want. Right.
Yeah. This is like the steps before the roads are actually being built.
It's the infrastructure. It's like Well, we've said that payroll is the commercial protocol for an individual, right? So it's where everything happens. It's where they pay their taxes from. It's where they pay their health insurance from. It's where they, fund their retirement accounts. It's where they pay their bills from. It's everything, right? So payroll. If we can get people to a place where they can easily use and easily manage both their identity and their employment, I mean, sky's the limit. You can build everything else on top of it, right? I mean,
there's a lot of potential, and there's this trend towards a more user or human first internet, right? Instead of like huge corporates. So we're starting to see a lot of that as well, like protecting users' rights, protecting user data, and combined with this decentralizing force, like you mentioned that people want variety sometimes, right? And maybe like a big city here in the US is not the best fit, right, for that. So there's want to give as much optionality as possible to people so that they can work anywhere they want and in the within a system that they would prefer, right? So this kind of gives a lot of optionality for that.
So optionality is a really interesting topic. I've actually riffed on that with a couple of other people too, but optionality seems to be the cornerstone of really what freedom's about, right? When you talk about, you can even make it a political conversation if you want, but like optionality, giving people choice is really the fundamental principle behind all of that.
It's the equality of opportunity and giving people a choice to do what they like,
or to be sold advertising, or to be exploited in their data, or sell their data, right? If you want to sell your data, that's your choice, but you should be the benefactor of selling your data, right? I mean, that's right. That's the only argument against the way data is handled today, is that the person whose data it isn't benefiting.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's talk about our partnership. So, you're baked into the Opolis stack. What do you think this evolves into down the road? How does Opolis and Magic Labs become a part of everybody's everyday life? Do some vision casting. Like we're at a very early stage of this, right? So like this isn't what I would say is it's not mature yet, right?
Right. Besides just providing like a solution, like as software as a service, I see there's a lot of synergy between kind of the employment stack and identity, right? And like I mentioned before, with Workday is probably one of the largest identity providers in the United States, right? So what the platform that Opolis is built on top of could potentially be that, right? Decentralized, but for like the entire world. And for us, we want to be, I want to enable this by letting people kind of tap into kind of this decentralized identity provider, right? This network. So I see not just one potential, just letting people authenticate into Opolis or DEOs, but also letting people interact with kind of all these financial applications that as an extension on top of this platform. And I think that's going to be like huge for people, like way better interest rates than what you could receive from a bank, way better like investment opportunities potentially, right? Like more like better synthetic products, and just you name it, and kind of really like open up the possibilities of decentralized finance and identity, and give people this this idea that their identity is also portable into other things. So it is it's a vision that makes a lot of sense if we don't want a world where it's like controlled by like this crazy hierarchy and this centralizing force
Facebook,
and monopolies.
It's either Facebook or it's Google or it's Citibank or some monstrosity that has very different incentives than what the individuals have.
Right. And just I've been thinking a lot about like models, right? And the trends for technology. And really there's two major forces, and one is democratization, and then one is automation, right? So if you think about the internet in the early days, it's like internets controlled by big telecom companies, and eventually it democratized into the internet, where it's owned by the participants of it to some extent, right? Before it's kind of
highly, it's still, it's corporatized, but it's still owned by the participants,
right?
Very powerful institutions, corporate institutions own the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
ISPs have very little to do with it now.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like kind of democratizing, like there's more participants than before. And then, I can see the same in the future, right? Like maybe every application, every company can be a bank, can be a financial service, can be an identity provider.
It's a really interesting concept,
Yeah.
Just much more fluid. It seems like, what we're doing is, and this is going to bring me to our final topic of conversation here in a minute, but just the fluidity of commercial experience is going to be much more seamless, right? Like I probably won't have to have logins and passwords to 6 different banks, like what Mint did back in the day, where they sort of consolidated, a little bit of that, but with everything, but with the decentralized ID and marketplaces that get built around new DeFi products, like insurance products, retirement products, investment products, the modification of investor accreditation laws, like, when you really think about the layers that could get impacted by a successful implementation of the employment experience,
right?
Like because like everything kind of piggybacks on that. But centralized employers, corporate employers don't want any of this other commercial activity happening around their employment, right? Like, even the conversations that we're having around healthcare anymore. Like, if people haven't realized that it's obvious that you shouldn't have your healthcare organized around your employer, like there's no correlation to why that actually makes any sense. You got to really rewind the clock to unpack that one. But like, why should we continue to do any of that stuff? Like, it should be user driven. Right?
Start from me. Yeah.
Start from the individual and give them choice. around all the different components that their commercial experience entails, and then the rest of it you just bolt it on and let the open markets decide what the good products are and what the bad products are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, a
100%.
global public utility for employment, nameless, faceless, that just is and does. How beautiful would that be?
Beautiful.
And scaling infinite value in a more cooperative, stakeholder-driven way. So let's talk about that. So the shared revenue model of Opolis. So you're familiar with it, of course.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to actually. You haven't even seen this yet, but we're going to get ready to discuss in our sort of stewardship circle, in which, of course, you'll be invited to at some point. The value creation and sharing program that involves tokenization. So bootstrapping essentially the network through a token model, right? And creating sustainable, shareable value that ultimately creates a new game and system. So tell us a little bit about like why that's of interest to you. Why do you think that matters? Like what is it about that particular component that you think matters the most?
I think it is just in general a really good incentive model because it does scale with the strength and of the network and how many participants are participating in this network. Right. So that's something that just makes a lot more sense. It's like rev share. That's something that we do as well. Like for the people like consultants who use Magic in their customers' products, then there's like a rev share model going on as well. It's a really good way to kind of align incentives between people, and in your case, maybe multiple providers as well, right? So everyone kind of helps contribute to the same idea, which is like kind of maximizing the kind of usage of the network, right? Which is like decentralized and it's like got different stakeholders. So I think it's a really powerful way to do that, to align incentives, and that's something that I can really get behind on.
Yeah, I think to give our listeners a little bit of context on this, and you and I have talked about this too, where I find it kind of funny that, or ironic, maybe funny isn't a good word, but ironic that we have a bunch of decentralized technology being built on highly centralized traditional companies, frameworks, right? So like C corps, and it's the old blueprint of VC, right? And I'm not gonna bash VC because I think VC has done a lot of good for the world, but we're evolving to this sort of place of stakeholdership, not just shareholdership.
Yeah.
Right. And rewarding participation, consumption, contribution, because value comes to a network in more denominations than just investment, right? It's not just capital that creates value in a network. And I think this is going to be a really interesting experiment. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, this has never really been done before. I mean, cooperatives have been around for a long time. There's examples of, shared value creation and distribution of value, and even in highly capitalistic senses, like there's very profitable cooperatives out there, right? Like it's not like we have to immediately run to the nonprofit or completely open source, not that a lot of the tech that we're all playing with isn't open source, but like the value creation isn't really lying in the tech then. It's really lying in the people and contribution. I mean, don't you think that's the most interesting part of this? Because up to this point, the value's all been in the tech,
right?
We're really. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's kind of growing out, right? So, the whole idea of crypto networks is that it's aligning participant incentives,
stakeholder incentives, right?
Stakeholder incentives, and then it kind of expands that beyond like an investor company relationship.
Right. It's highly multidimensional.
Right. Even including the users. The users of the Bitcoin network are also contributing to it to some extent.
Of course.
Yeah. And so it started with this like this pure element of like a successful social experiment, right? And then it kind of expanded now into more use cases, and people are really being creative around that. And I think that the employment organizations, it's one of the major beneficiaries of this model, right? So now we're just elaborating based on the core concept of stakeholder incentive alignment, and this is and what we're seeing now with all these governance models, even DeFi projects launching tokens, and it's kind of happening, and we're seeing all these signs, right, of this movement happening, and yeah.
Well, it's like a convergence. It's like all the different principles from governance and DeFi and tokenization, crypto economics, shareholder or stakeholder alignment, game theory design, like all of these things are starting to actually come into view.
Yeah.
Like they're. Yeah, hang on a second. I accidentally hit my Siri or something. But yeah, they're listening. It's actually starting to feel like it's not just a crypto nerd game anymore.
Right.
You know, like it's actually starting to feel like, and when we started ETH Denver in 2018, and even in 2019, like it didn't feel like that. It felt very. I mean, we were always talking about usability and user adoption and UX considerations and private key management and all of that. But like, I think we were actually getting to a place now where we have incredibly competent teams that have emerged, and now it's about figuring out how to sustainably get them to collaborate towards a handful of very important considerations and projects, but then have their stakeholders all benefit, right? So it's not actually about really figuring out the next version of a scarcity model of sharing. It's actually figuring out the abundance model of pure collaboration in a technological world.
Yep.
That's what it feels like we're moving into.
That's right. I think this is a switch from scarcity to abundance mindset. Just the economics 100%. And collaboration. Yeah.
If there's one thing that everybody listening to this needs to take away, that is a human thing, not a technological thing. But the technological thing allows for a system to exist that people can operate from abundance, not just purely based on scarcity, which is how most of our games are designed today. And when I say games, I mean everything that we participate in is a game of sorts, but it's all based on scarcity. It's based on limited resources and the notion that I have to compete with you to get it, instead of collaborating with you to multiply to 1 + 1 = 3. Right? Like we've never actually created a capitalistic system of value creation that operates that way with a very uncapped, scalable system. We've never done it.
Right. So now we have the infrastructure to do it, and
we're
the minds
right there
behind it. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up into Q&A. And if we don't have any Q&A, then we'll wrap for a couple more minutes, and then we will move on to the next call next time. So, or we'll just kind of cast into the future here. So any questions? So go ahead. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A function on Zoom that you can go in and actually type your question live. Sean and I are here. We'll answer your question on air. If there are no questions, then I have a couple of follow-up topics we can just jam on for a minute, and we'll go from there. So please put your questions in now. All right. While they're doing that, if you were to say the thing that you're most excited about, the one thing that you're most excited about in the next 6 months to 6 to 18 months, what is it?
Well, a lot of things.
Give me your number one short list. Like, what's the top thing that you're most excited about?
I hope COVID kind
goes
of
away.
Remains more under goes away. so the borders can lose some restrictions, and I can actually visit my family. So that's really top of mind actually for me, because I haven't seen them for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've got the same thing on my radar too. We do have a couple questions that have popped in here.
Nice.
Are there plans to work with other companies? So this is from Joseph Wesley. So Joseph, yes, in the context of Opolis, we have a roadmap to work with. I think we have 15, Sean, that we've kind of mapped out, 15 projects that we've
in the
something like that
paper. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got plans to work with, smart contracts for legal agreements, decentralized accounting software, decentralized billing software. Like, there's a ton of integrations that we're looking at. DeFi markets, freelancer financing for invoices, things like that. So there's a ton on the radar for that. So yeah, a lot more to come. In fact, we've got a ton of partnerships going on. So if you haven't read the off-white paper, go to opolis.co, download it, check it out. That'll give you a sampling. And if you have interest in talking with us more about any of that, or if you have a project that you think we'd be interested in, we're actually actively looking for partners in certain compartments of the native technology stack. Thanks for your question, Joseph. Next question is from Dustin Big Red Goodwin. How you doing, Dustin? How do you envision the cross between capital formation and the employment experience? There's a future casting question. So the short answer for this, without spending the next 20 minutes riffing on the topic, is I think what happens when the employment commons becomes a global movement, and there's millions, if not, the goal would be 1 billion people globally. Let's start there. If you have that kind of captivity, or that captive attention — captivity is a bad word, but the captive attention from that amount of people, but they're choosing to be there. It's their choice, right? You have a much easier way to organize people, and you have a much easier way to aggregate other resources. And because you're dealing with payroll, I mean, you could have community funds that pop up out of this. You could have investment vehicles that pop up, VC funds that are funded purely by people's payroll. I mean, again, I mentioned accredited investor laws. I think we're going to see shift in that. I think we're going to see maybe a certification or something like that instead of just net worth, where I can take a quick test, just like a Series 7, and I can actually qualify to invest without having to have a ton of capital. So I think having that many people, collective bargaining is not a new thing. Collective anything is not a new thing. But if we're actually successful in creating a public utility for employment that aggregates people into this shared effort, that type of cooperation opens up doors like I don't think we've ever seen for capital formation and other type of finance products like that, or investment vehicles for just the regular individual. It's never been possible before. But as we talked about earlier in the podcast, you've got to do this part first before you can do those kind of vehicles. Because right now, nobody has access to them. Nobody would know where to find them or what to look for. But if they're just sitting in your payroll dashboard at some point in the future, hey, why not put $50 into that? Why not put $100 into that? Why not? You can have Morningstar ratings on these things, just like anything else. I mean, it could be a really interesting thing. Thanks for the question, Dustin. Joseph Wesley, we're back. Another question from you. Okay. I think we've already answered this one. Expand service offerings. So yes, the answer to that is yeah. We do. We do plan on expanding the service offerings quite a bit and offering much more robust native technology as well as marketplaces into lots of different financial products and things. Question from Julian to either of us. Who do you think the company protocol group project is doing the best job at solving the data portability problem?
Yeah.
Data associated with digital identity. That's a good question.
This is a good one. I'd definitely recommend taking a look at Streetbox. I think it almost feels like they're the pioneers in the space, and they recently announced Ceramic protocol, which is like a more lower level infrastructure to support something like this. And us here at Magic is looking really closely at Streetbox and Ceramic protocol and figuring out ways that we can kind of leverage the technology to provide data portability for users. There's just there's also other companies like Oasis Labs. I think they're a bit more focused on the privacy aspect as well. So there are quite a few, and those are the top of mind right now.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about 3box is up to this point, most identity projects have really focused on not just authentication, but also the data part, right? So like
right.
Michael, one of the co-founders of 3box comes from Uport, which was one of the first identity projects. And I think they, in he and I's conversations, they've learned quite a bit from that experience. And now instead of focusing on the authentication part at all, they're focusing on really the components that make up the real reputation, if you will, or identity of a person in a, whether it's, a lot of this is commercial experience stuff, but I would actually echo the sentiments. I mean, I think, I think the experience that the team at 3box has is probably some of the best that I've seen, and they got high integrity as well. So these are really quality individuals that are building the project. So shout out to our friends at 3box. But I think if you do read the Opolis Off white paper, they are one of the planned integrations. I think there's a little bit of groundwork and just development and maturation to happen with the Opolis Employment Commons to actually get that done. But we also share the same interest, and we're closely following to see what happens with them. So free shout out to 3box. All right. Any other questions? Let's see. We got time for like one more. So if anybody else has a question, dump it in the Q&A real quick, and we'll jump on it. It's going to be really interesting to see. I was just reading, this is totally off topic, but I was just, the Major League Baseball 60-game season is coming back now, and they're going to be like the first ones, it seems like, to actually attempt to put fans in the stadiums on some level. But
when is that?
It starts at the end of this month. So I think the 24th, July 24th. And several teams have indicated that they're going to let, quote, a limited amount of fans into the park. Now, what that means, I don't know. I mean, with a 50,000 person ballpark,
right?
Oh, wow. What are you going to do? Let 400 people in? Like,
I think it may be at the gate. Like how far do people stand? If you stand too close, they may be infected at the gate. So
I know the whole thing seems like a total nightmare to me. So that'll be really interesting to see. All right. Well, we haven't had any other questions come in. So Sean, thank you for your time.
So
your insight and wisdom is always very well appreciated. The conversation is always really fun. I look forward to doing lots of different things with you guys and your team. Of course, just thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for that.
Likewise. I enjoy our conversation every time. And
so to our, you're very welcome. To our listeners, thank you for joining this episode of Opolis Public Radio. Remember to subscribe on Opolis's YouTube channel for more videos just like this. If you subscribe, or you can subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts if you prefer just the audio version. If you are a freelancer, gig worker, independent contractor, entrepreneur, or just looking to explore the idea of self-sovereign work, come check out Opolis at opolis.co. That's opolis.co. And we'll see you there. Thanks, everybody.